Hi, everyone. This is beautiful. Thanks for having us. So today we're going to be chatting a little bit, as you could probably imagine, about zero-knowledge proofs, a technology that's existed for almost 50 years, I believe, but has just now been able to be unlocked thanks to the power of the blockchain. So I think it's a really interesting time that we find ourselves here with lots of projects entering the space. But one of the major questions that we continue to have is across all of this technology is how does it actually impact our everyday lives? How does this technology start to introduce itself? How do we see it make its way into consumers' hands? And how does it change the landscape across the next 10 to 20 years and even more? So the first question, I think, is how has blockchain enabled this technology to become something that's been a bit of a hot button question and a bit of a hot topic in the past year or so?
So, relatively speaking, ZK proofs are a new type of mathematics. It actually falls into the category of proofs, which we've had around for a while. So, any new field of math changes our fundamental understanding of the world and creates applications that we can't even imagine. But the problem typically with cryptography or any type of math is, where do you get funding from? Right? There's not a lot of funding in academic research, and especially the type of people that would even understand how the math works behind zero-knowledge proofs are really highly paid. And so blockchain, the major benefit of blockchain for ZK is literally just the funding mechanisms. Like, turns out, I'm sure we'll get to this, the succinctness property is really helpful for blockchains. And this essentially just adds billions of dollars of value and hundreds of millions of dollars into researching a new field of cryptography or math. Yay! Which is unusual in academic fields.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's better. So just to add a bit more to that. So look, I mean, it's a bit of a demand question as well, right? So there is demand for zero-knowledge proofs and zero-knowledge proof production, and much of that these days comes from rollups, right? Which is a strategy for offloading computation to make it more scalable ultimately. And the demand for scalability is where a lot of the game is. And the second sort of property that people are after is privacy. And so zero-knowledge proofs give you both of these things if you apply them skillfully enough and if you sort of do the right things in terms of software, hardware, and all these other factors.
What zero knowledge does is it's a perfect fit. It gives us privacy and scalability, which the blockchain by itself doesn't give.
I think I want to talk a little bit more about that part in particular. We just mentioned the hardware requirements that are necessary. But even just the environment that we find ourselves with fully public blockchains, what kind of limitations does that give us in terms of use cases when we do have a fully public blockchain currently?
So besides the argument that I personally believe privacy is a human right, money has always been private until around the 60s and throughout human history. So we're just going back to an older paradigm, ignoring the moral argument. I like what the CEO of Onyx, which is the blockchain arm of JP Chase, said, which is, if there isn't privacy in blockchains, no institution will ever adopt blockchains. Their business model is customer data. Their business model is private algorithms. Their business model is having this proprietary data. And right now, blockchain is tiny. Like, it feels very big, but a couple $1 trillion is nothing compared to the real, like amount of money that's available in financial world. And if we really do want adaptation, at the very least, for institutions, we need privacy. Again, beyond the moral argument.
I mean, beyond the privacy factor, right? So it goes back to the trilemma, which is price decentralization and performance characteristics such as throughput. And what you can do with zero-knowledge proofs is you can genuinely solve the trilemma, right, if you play your cards right. And we are certainly starting to see that on the throughput side, and over time, I think we'll, as a community, get into greater decentralization as well.
Yeah, so I think the main point has been made. Financial data has always been private and should remain private. Well, there are other applications of zero knowledge. You can also think of big databases, medical data. we have a huge privacy problem, which is actually beyond the blockchain. But and zero knowledge, I'm convinced zero knowledge is going to play a role in that aspect as well.
So something that was just mentioned as well is the trilemma, and I want to talk about that for just a second, and then explain how that actually gets into a lot of the main use cases when we start to solve this trilemma here of privacy, scalability, etc. So if you guys could talk a little bit more about that trilemma and what's solving that, and how zero knowledge solves the trilemma, at least in some ways, and what that actually starts to unlock for it, so we can turn into this use case conversation.
So sort of currently the most important aspect of ZK proofs, they're not necessarily even private, is the succinctness. And essentially that means, like, let's say we're playing Sudoku together. It's the same Sudoku puzzle. And I want to show you that I solved my Sudoku, but I don't want to give you the answer. Fuck you, you have to do it on your own. Using a zero knowledge proof, I can show you that I completed this puzzle correctly, but I don't have to show any of the answers to how I did it, right? So what does this mean in blockchain, right? Let's assume a network where there is 3,000 nodes, right? And each node takes 5 seconds to execute a transaction. And essentially this means that around the world, there's 3,000 computers doing 4 hours of re-executing the same transactions over and over and over and over again. And the reason why we need this in blockchain is because a blockchain is not one static database that's the truth. We need to come to consensus on what the current state of a blockchain is, right? So with ZK proofs, instead of having 4 hours of re-execution across 3,000 computers, only one has to actually make a proof of their execution. And if they're able to generate that proof, they couldn't have lied. They ran the program correctly, and then all the rest of the 3,000 nodes run a very quick verification of the proof, and they don't need to do any of the work again, right? And that's where it becomes important for blockchains, because all of a sudden you can have a sort of adversarial environment where no one can be adversaries, right? And using this, we can essentially increase the throughput, especially in L2 systems, of the system without being too worried about having to have 100,000 or 400,000 nodes across the world all re-executing over and over again.
Right.
So yeah, in addition to re-execution, I mean, I should also mention the tremendous progress we've had as a community in the last, 2-3 years alone, in terms of being able to create proofs of much bigger problems effectively, right? So there's been a tremendous amount of rapid progress on that, and that's really what is allowing us to create much higher throughput systems. And certainly we are seeing that in a variety of roll-up solutions that are showing up connected to Ethereum, but that's really not the only space either. And just to go back to decentralization, we are again starting to see some progress there. So I think, there's a number of projects out there that are focusing on decentralizing proving, so that, you can have people at home producing small proofs that are then brought together and joined together with recursion, and that gives you a measure of decentralization. And that's kind of, again, how you go back and satisfy all the different elements of this trilemma. That is to say, you have throughput, you have decentralization, and you still maintain a low cost of proof production and execution as a result.
Pile in on that.
Yeah, well, so the term zero knowledge actually got different meaning, right? It can be related to privacy, and it can be related to succinctness. And so the important aspect of these techniques is the verifiable computation, right? We want to be able to do a verifiable computation in which we have a processor with weak resources that's going to outsource a computation, and that wants to verify that the computation has been done correctly. And this can be done in a private way or not. And that is what it makes it private or not. So it depends to some extent on the application in which of the two cases you are.
Daniel, you want to talk real quick about decentralizing proving?
Yeah, so that's a common misconception in ZK, that you need these beastly machines that are able to execute every block, all of the block. It's actually, relatively speaking, straightforward to decentralize ZK proving. You always have to worry about leader election and fallback mechanisms, but the thing that people don't understand is in a normal blockchain, you need to execute every single transaction sequentially. So one after another. So if there's 10 transactions, each transaction takes 10 seconds to execute. That takes 100 seconds. With ZK proving, it doesn't have to be sequential because you already know the inputs and the outputs of the expected results. So you can actually just send each transaction to a different ZK prover, execute them or prove them in parallel, send them back, and then just make a recursive proof. It's really easy to scale decentralized proving in a way that maybe a phone eventually could do it or a normal laptop could do it.
Just to add a bit more color to this, right? I mean, things become even more exciting when you add specialized hardware, right? So things like FPGAs and ASICs, then you have really quite a variety of options, and if you think about parallelizing the proof, you can actually have much smaller completion times as well. So that's, I think, what's quite exciting, which also, as a result, lowers the price of proof production.
It's the future of mining, right? Of the miners.
Here, here.
It's proof mining, as some people call it.
Yay, we have use for GPUs again.
I like you all are adding one little line on the way back. That's a good way of doing this panel. I appreciate it. So it's been a busy year for ZK. We've seen a lot of headlines. We've seen a lot of people jumping into the space. We've seen a lot of development. We've seen a lot of projects come and go. I'm curious now, as we start to look down the road a little bit, if you could start to forecast what things look like in the next, year for ZK. What are some of the headlines you think that we would see? And then even going further, what would you expect the landscape to look like in around 5 years?
So that question depends a little bit if you mean a blockchain setting or not in a blockchain setting.
However you want.
Let's say in a blockchain setting, it's going to become a meme before it becomes properly scalable, right? Like right now, honestly, like I work in ZK. The reality is right now, like optimistic chains are going to be cheaper. They're going to have less security issues, right? Any cryptography is a function of time x money. Like how much money do you have there and how long do people have the chance to break this protocol? In the future, I definitely think that as we're able to figure out like decentralizing provers, as the cryptography gets tested over time, as we're able to start, like the bottleneck right now in ZK protocols is actually data availability cost. In the future, it'll actually be the sequencers. And how do we parallelize certain transactions? How do we handle shared state if we allow more transactions? So let's say 5 years from now, I do think that it's going to become like a core fundamental part of any blockchain that actually cares about scaling. Before that, it's going to be a meme, and people are going to pile in money because we're in blockchain.
That's what they do, yeah.
And I want to say, like, for outside of blockchain, again, it's a new field of math. I think ZK will be applied in ways that we never think about, right? Like, for example, how do you, like, let's say someone takes a picture of Trump grabbing something again, and he denies it, right? How do you prove that it was taken at a specific time and location? Well, you can use a trusted sensor for that, but nobody uploads a full image onto the website, right? And it's like megabytes big. You compress it, and then all of a sudden you can't prove it's the original image. You could actually run that like permutation, that transformation with a ZK proof to prove that it's still the original image. It's going to show up in so many different places outside of blockchain that I don't think we even have properly time to actually walk through these examples that we already know today, let alone, let's see, in 100 years, 1,000 years, where they apply it.
So when it comes to blockchains, I think certainly there'll be competition for greater performance, greater throughput, lower latency, right? So we'll have some road markers like visa scale, that sort of thing, a certain number of, like a huge number of TPS. Certainly there'll be a lot of focus on that in the next, let's say, 3 years alone. And then there'll be focus on expressiveness, right? So we'll have specialized chains, what we call hyperchains in ZkSync or L3s, sometimes people call it, application level chains, greater support for bridges, interrupt, that sort of thing. I mean, I think all of that will become a reality. It will be quite a lot easier to create these chains on demand in a corporate setting, in a kind of public setting. There'll be kind of mix and match kind of solutions, and hopefully over time we'll get some measure of privacy thrown into the mix as well.
Yeah, so I agree that for the short term, the optimistic will still be the way to go. But I do also think that within the next 3 or 5 years, the ZK rollups will take over. If we look at the progress that has been made over the last 5 years, I'm a cryptographer. I'm astonished by the amount of papers that have been around. As you say, when there's money there, then things start to move. And I also think that the how can I say, the impact of this development will be the application of ZK proofs outside of the blockchain sphere. It's gonna leverage the use of these techniques in other domains, which I think is a good sign. It's a good progress.
I love the theoretical conversation too of where we're going in the really long term, but bringing it back to like, what do you think happens first? What do you think is like the watershed moment that starts to happen with zero-knowledge proofs that catches on, where either at the enterprise level or the individual level, where do you think ZKPs will impact our lives first?
Does meme coins count? I mean, honestly, like, let me take that a bit more abstractly. The first institutional adaptation of ZK proofs is probably going to be supply chain management, right? And that's outside of like just like crypto people buying some random shit. The example of this is Walmart Canada had something like 70,000 shipment providers and add in hundreds of thousands of shipments every year. And they essentially had 70% of all of their shipments were under dispute. They didn't believe the truck driver that they got caught in traffic. They didn't believe the tomatoes went bad from the temperature. So they literally launched a private blockchain where they installed little IoT chips inside of every single truck. And they sort of tracked those like temperature, GPS. And now after implementing this solution, they only have 3% of transactions under dispute. And that's hundreds of millions of dollars over a long period. And the problem with the private setting in that case, or them running the nodes, is now they don't have to trust the truck drivers, but the truck drivers still need to trust them. So the benefit of public is no one has to trust anyone. The benefit of privacy is they're not going to release their proprietary data. So I think like real world application use of blockchain is going to be supply chain as well as just finance, like finance industry, like putting in money, like just an LP or playing arbitrage and actually trying to capture some of that money without revealing their trade secrets.
I mean, I think when it comes to public blockchains, roll-ups alone, right, we are quite likely in the next, 3 to 4 months even to see much cheaper data availability, or we're likely to see hundreds of TPS, at least on some of them. And we are quite likely to see shared sequencing as well. I think proving might take a while longer, but I think this is a matter of months. I mean, it's all within shooting distance at this point. This is, hardly science fiction.
So from a very theoretical perspective, the zero-knowledge protocols already exist for a very long time. And I think a large area in which zero-knowledge protocols has been developed is for credential mechanisms, personal credentials. I know David Chan worked on this, Stefan Brands worked on that. He sold it to Microsoft, I believe, and it never caught on. And so there have been various systems around with use zero knowledge, but that are not called zero knowledge. I think the real change now is what I call verifiable computation, the application of zero knowledge into verifiable computation.
You want to add something?
From a blockchain point of view, and this is a loaded statement.
Here we go.
Scalability trilemma, right? The meme. Blockchains don't scale. That's the reality, guys. Like, try getting 1 billion people using a blockchain every day. It's not going to work, right? And I don't want to go in too much, but I'm probably not doing it justice too. there are several Lego steps that we have started to figure out and will probably be used in the future for figuring out actual scaling for blockchain. So having this sort of hyperchain or superchain concept with being able to have sort of atomic and trustless interoperability between those fractals, and doing something like a shared sequencer that doesn't need to execute every single transaction, that in combination with the ZK proving part actually might solve scalability, period. The last challenge that really, okay, we need years for this, but the last part of that we really, really need is honestly just interoperability. But we're starting to get the pieces of figuring out how to actually scale blockchain to billions of people and do kind of what we do in Web 2, which is sort of dynamic load balancing.
Great. Well, this has been awesome. Been great chatting with you guys. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to Metis for having us. And as you said, it's hardly science fiction. It's right around the corner. Everyone here is already building some incredible zero-knowledge projects, and we look forward to everything else that's being built in the near future. Thank you.